The heat was a physical weight. January in southern Brazil doesn't just burn, it suffocates. We sat on the porch, suspended over that bleeding red clay, while the house itself seemed to groan under the sun. My cousin was a product of the city. To him, the silence of the valley wasn't peace, it was an insult. He sat on the white wooden railing, swinging his legs, looking down at the Vaum, the dark, hollow crawl space beneath the floorboards. It was a domain of shadows, a place that smelled of damp earth, dried chicken droppings, and the sour, ancient scent of rotting imbuya wood. "Devil," he said. The word wasn't shouted, it was dropped into the air with a casual cruelty, like someone tossing a stone into a deep, dark well just to see if something splashes at the bottom. My blood went cold. In the Taquara highlands, especially under my grandmother's roof, certain words aren't just sounds, they are invitations. You don't strike a match in a room full of gunpowder, and you don't call the bad thing by its name. "Stop it," I whispered. I could taste iron in my mouth, the metallic tang of a fear that the countryside teaches you long before you learn to read. He didn't stop. He leaned over the edge, his eyes mocking the darkness below. He began to chant it in a low, rhythmic melody. "Devil, devil, devil." With every repetition, the world around us reacted. The cicadas, the constant buzzing heartbeat of the forest, fell silent all at once. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. Then the house spoke back. A long, deep crack echoed through the imbuya beams beneath our feet, a groan of wood that sounded like a physical lament. "He won't come just because I called him," my cousin scoffed, standing up. "It's just a name, a label for your own cowardice." At that exact moment, a figure appeared on the dirt road. It was our neighbor, an old man whose face was a map of wrinkles carved by the sun and the soil. He stopped at the white fence, clutching his straw hat with trembling fingers. "Good afternoon, boys," the old man said, his voice raspy and thin. He looked at my cousin. "You must be the one from the city. Tell me, boy, what is your name?" The air seemed to freeze. Time slowed. I saw a single drop of sweat roll down my cousin's temple. The mockery in his eyes vanished, replaced with a coldness that didn't belong to a boy his age. He spat into the red dust and spoke with a chilling gravity. "My name is Devil." The old man didn't blink. His smile didn't just fade, it died. He looked at my cousin, then shifted his gaze to the pitch-black crawl space directly behind us. His face turned the color of ash. "God deliver us," the neighbor whispered. He made the sign of the cross with a frantic, desperate speed, adjusted his hat, and hurried away down the road like he had just stared into the eyes of a predator. My cousin let out a dry, hollow laugh. "See, fear is the only real thing in this graveyard." But he was wrong. I looked
down at the floorboards, at the tiny millimetric gaps where the wax didn't reach, down in the absolute darkness of the Vaum, where the air is stagnant and the sun never reaches. Something moved. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was the dry, rhythmic rustle of heavy fabric dragging across the dirt. Something long and thin was adjusting its position, settling in to watch us. My cousin thought he was playing a game with a name, but something in the shadows had just accepted the introduction.
The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for the floorboards to give way. I looked at the ground beneath our chairs. The shadows cast by the porch pillars were stretching, growing longer than the sun should have allowed. The air had changed. It tasted like metal, the sharp ozone scent that comes before a massive storm, though the sky remained a cruel, artificial blue. "Let's go for a ride," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like it was being squeezed. "The bikes, now!" I needed to move. I needed the wind on my face to blow away the weight of that word, the name my cousin had just claimed. We ran to the back of the house where our bicycles leaned against the woodshed. As I gripped the handlebars, I couldn't stop my eyes from drifting toward the Vaun. In that absolute darkness beneath the floor, I felt a presence, curious, or perhaps hungry. It was shifting, settling into the dirt to watch us leave. We didn't just ride, we fled. My cousin led the way on his military green city bike, its thin tires slicing through the red dust. I followed on my heavy Monarch, the red and yellow frame rattling as we crested the hill. The descent was a rite of passage, a steep, jagged slope of bleeding clay that dropped toward the old chicken coop. We let go of the brakes. Gravity grabbed us by the shoulders, pulling our stomachs into our throats. The world became a blur of chlorophyll green and rust red. The wind whipped past my ears, but it couldn't drown out the metallic clack, clack, clack of my cousin's gears. It sounded like teeth. We skidded to a halt at the old sawmill, a monument to abandonment. The ground was covered in mountains of sawdust, golden dunes of wood dust that had been piling up for decades. The air smelled sweet, resinous, and deathly still. "What do you think is under all this?" my cousin asked, burying his arms into the golden pile. "Earth," I replied, trying to keep my logic like a shield. He smiled, that smile that made my blood freeze. "Or people," he whispered. "People who fell into the circular saws and were ground into the timber. This isn't just dust, it's the memory of everyone who died working here." I shivered, feeling the fine powder cling to my sweaty skin like tiny phantom hands trying to pull me down. "Let's go to the ceramics plant," he decided abruptly, shaking the dust from his clothes. "I want to see if the tapper is there."
We rode toward the twilight. The sun was dying now, a bruised purple hue spreading across the horizon. The freedom of the ride was gone, replaced by a feeling of being herded, driven toward the labyrinths of the deserted factory. The ceramics plant was a skeleton of brick and clay. No workers, no fire in the kilns. Even the crickets had been censored by an invisible force. We stopped in the center of the main yard. The ground was hard-packed red earth, a blank canvas of dust. "Did you hear that?" he asked. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes, now wide, the pupils dilated into pools of black ink, were fixed on a blind spot between two drying sheds. I heard nothing, and that was the horror of it all. The silence was so dense it felt like lead pressing against my eardrums. Then the barrier broke. It didn't come from the sky or the trees. It came from the ground. A dry, percussive rhythm, a metallic cadence like two polished stones being struck together with mathematical precision. Tack, 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 tack. It grew, it gained volume and weight, transforming into a frantic tap dance. It was the sound of heavy boots striking the earth at a speed no human muscle could sustain. A mockery of a dance, circling us, an invisible crowd celebrating in the dust. "The tapper," my cousin whispered. For the first time, fascination had replaced his arrogance. "He's here." Between the sheds, a vortex began to form. I thought it was a simple dust devil, common in the summer, but as it slid into the yard, I saw the impossible architecture of it. The whirlwind was 2 meters high, but it was clean. No leaves, no red dust, no debris. It was a spiral of pure, transparent air, a translucent vacuum that bent the light around it like a distorted lens. It didn't move randomly. It moved with predatory intent. It drew figure eights around the brick piles, synchronized perfectly with that rhythmic tack, tack, tack. The air around us turned ice cold. It smelled of old iron exposed to rain. "Let's go, please," I implored, my knuckles white against my handlebars. He didn't move. He was hypnotized. Suddenly, the barrier of fear inside him snapped, but it didn't turn into flight. It turned into a desperate need to test the impossible. With a cry of euphoria that was swallowed by the tapping, my cousin released his brakes. He pedaled with everything he had, straight into the center of the spiral. I watched, paralyzed. As his bike entered the radius of the vortex, the light refracted. He seemed to shrink, folding in on himself. It wasn't an optical illusion. It was as if space itself was being compacted to fit into the throat of that whirlwind. The boy and the bike became two-dimensional silhouettes, distorted, disintegrating. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. There was no scream, no impact, just a sudden, absolute silence that fell over the yard like a lead shroud. The whirlwind evaporated, leaving behind a lingering scent of scorched metal and dead earth. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they would crack. "Cousin?" I called out. My voice was a pathetic sound, devoured by the empty brick walls. Seconds felt like eternities. I imagined the horror of returning alone, of trying to explain the vanishing to my grandmother. Then I heard the sound of tires crushing gravel. He emerged from the shadows of the same shed. He wasn't pedaling, he was coasting, his feet dragging on the ground. When he stopped beside me, the moonlight revealed a face I didn't recognize. He was pale, the color of melted wax. His eyes were nothing but black oil. Did it take you?" I stammered, my body shaking violently. He didn't look at me. He wiped a smudge of gray soot from his forehead and stared into the void. His voice was a raspy whisper, stripped of every ounce of his city boy pride. "It's gone," he said, but I got close. I saw what's inside. He leaned toward me. His breath smelled of ozone and wet soil. "Next time you see that whirlwind," he instructed with a gravity that chilled my soul, "throw a piece of iron or a stick into the center." "Why?" He swallowed hard, a flicker of raw terror finally crossing his face. "Because if you hit the middle, it bleeds." The words hung between us, heavier than the bricks. Red clay dust began to settle on our skin like a second layer of flesh. My cousin hadn't just invited the entity, he had looked into its eyes. And as we turned our bikes back toward the